Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Madeline Milka, President and CEO of APAICS, the Asian Pacific American Institute for Congressional Studies. Thank you for joining us today for our APAICS in Conversation. We are delighted to have as our moderator, Tina Sung, who is Vice President of the Partnership for Public Service. She convenes and champions government leaders at the highest levels of the executive branch to maximize their impact and success in government. A multi-sector executive leader with a track record of innovation and accomplishment in every phase of her professional career, she founded 2 companies focused on government innovation and executive transition. And we are delighted to have as our special guest, Nani Coloretti, who is the Senior Vice President for Financial and Business Strategy at the Urban Institute. She served the Obama administration for almost 8 years, most recently as Deputy Secretary of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD. As the second most senior official at HUD, she managed the department's day-to-day operations and cross-cutting program initiatives, including a $45 billion annual budget and approximately 8,000 employees. Nani served as Assistant Secretary for Management at U.S. Department of Treasury, Acting Chief Operating Officer of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and Policy Advisor and Budget Director for then San Francisco Mayor Gavin Newsom. Please welcome our 2 special guests, and I turn it over to Tina.
Good morning or good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Madeline. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I think you are all in for a treat. I've known Nani for about a decade when she stood up a federal agency, and through these many years, we've been trusted friends and colleagues. I know her as an exceptional leader, a policy advisor, coach and mentor, a loving mom and wife, and she's very generous and warm with her advice and her attention to everything involving our community. So you're all in for a treat today. And so let's just get started in the short time that we have. We'll start with this first question, Nani. Tell us about your career journey and what actually drew you into public service.
Sure. Thanks so much, Tina, for that really lovely introduction and for being my questioner today. I really, really appreciate you, and I appreciate the Partnership for Public Service. Thank you. Thank you so much. And also to Madeline Milky and the people at APAICS who, first of all, set up this conversations, fireside chats, I think they were calling them. But just a way for us to connect to each other over Zoom at a time when we can't all be in person. So thank you so much for doing that and for all the work you do. I just wanted to start off by saying, like, for my career, it took some twists and turns, but what I really wanted to do was use economics to help solve hard problems. And I could find no harder problems to solve than those in the public sector. So that is how I sort of got into this line of work. And I walked in through the budget and finance door. There are lots of doors you can walk into to do public policy service, but that's the door I walked into, mostly because I like to use math and quantitative data. So that really lends itself well to that. So I started off as a budget analyst for the state of Hawaii. And then after graduate school, came out to DC for my first stint in the federal government, working at the Office of Management and Budget on healthcare finance. And then from there, just did a whole series of jobs, some of which you heard about in the introduction. Also taking a detour to do some economics consulting in the middle there, which really helped me define better what I wanted to do. And what I really want to do is serve people.
All right, so what motivates you now to do your work? You're now at a nonprofit, the Urban Institute. So what draws you to that work and what's special about it?
Yeah, so today I work helping manage and run a 50-something-year-old think tank called Urban Institute. And Urban Institute is a really special place. It's a place that I've interacted with throughout my whole career. It is a series, it basically has a bunch of people there working to advance the well-being of everyone and address opportunity and equality. They're really doing this through evidence and insights and policy advice. And so what I do is I help make everything run at Urban Institute, and I get to work with all sorts of researchers and really kind of get a bird's eye view into all sorts of issues. It's a really great place to be.
Well, APEC's mission is to increase participation and representation at all levels of public service, advocacy, serving in Congress, running for office. Now, you talked about coming in one way, walking through the budget door. But what other doors did you actually cross over the threshold to take on? And what advice would you give to others who just think, oh, government is policy, that's so sexy? What other doors are
Yeah.
there?
So that's such a great question, Tina. I would say that there are lots of ways to serve and to do really important program and policy work. For me, what I would say is it's really important to understand what drives you personally, what your personal mission is. For me, I really was interested early on in addressing issues of inequality through income supports. So I had thought I would be working on welfare reform back in the day, and ended up working on Medicaid, which is a program that serves low income. It's a low income healthcare coverage program in every state. And through that work, I ended up kind of going into San Francisco and working more programmatically, working with communities to understand what children, youth, and their families might need to make their lives better, and then trying to align a community-based budget towards that. And so right there, I've already kind of talked through several ways you can do this work. I like to do it in government because I think that there's a scope and scale there where you can really help a lot of people and actually talk to a lot of people and learn from them. But here at Urban Institute, what we're doing is also trying to lift up those voices and research and insights to affect a very broad scale as well. So there's a lot of, as I mentioned before, just a lot of different ways to do that. I like to rely on my ability to interact with people, and also, as I mentioned before, math and data skills.
Yeah, so I have that undercurrent of economics and math, but then you were at local government, you were at the center of government, that you were a cabinet department. And I remember meeting you when you stood up a brand new agency for the federal government. So what and whom do you lean on when you encounter the unfamiliar? Because you're usually blazing new trails, knowing you. So who do you rely on, or what do you rely on to blaze those new trails when it's new and different?
So I do my work in teams and with people. My higher level skills are really interacting with people. And so what I did when the Dodd-Frank Act passed, and a set of us over at Treasury were asked to go create this new entity that was really aimed at making sure the consumer financial world had a cop on the beat, is how they call it, a way for several different agencies. There were 6 different federal agencies that transferred laws and authorities and people to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. So it was both a new build and a kind of a reorganization. So what I do when I'm facing something unknown is I talk to the smartest people I can find on every issue. And one of the places I turned to was a partnership for public service. I called Max Steyer, Tina's boss, and said, so we have to stand up this new agency. Can you recommend some people in the federal space who have stood up new agencies, or who may know about how to align mission and practice in this way? And then we also at CFPB, we talk to a lot of people outside of government to learn about how to use data and information from consumers to direct where CFPB should direct their attention next. And so I lean on people to help understand what they know and to try to translate it into something to be done in the job I'm facing.
Well, say more about the value of a network, because I know you have a very broad network, but how do you nurture it and sustain it? So when you need them, you can pick up the phone and call. It's not just a cold call. So a lot of people ask us about networking. So maybe you could give tips on that.
I guess I would say it helps as you think of networking, is really just thinking of it as learning about people and hearing from them about what they're doing and having genuine interest in what others are doing. That kind of interaction with folks can help sustain a network, but also can help you with all sorts of things. We moved out here in 2009, my husband, my son, and I, from Northern California. And we had to move here really quickly. And I relied on my network for every single part of that move, including what school should we go to? What, give me your best information about neighborhoods to live in. Give me your best information about even how to sell my car. So I relied on my network, not just for work, but for all kinds of other things that might come up. And as you know, Tina, as a mom, you also find yourself in the mom network, which is a very powerful network of people that are focused on trying to learn all the time to make life better for their families. And so that is also, that is a non-professional network, but a network I rely on too, so.
Yeah, and I know you're very extroverted, so how do you sustain it? Any tips? I mean, you reach out, but there's a regular rhythm to what you do.
Yeah, so you have to take the approach that's good for you. That's what I would say if you're trying to or wanting to build a network. For some people, it takes a lot of energy to basically build and sustain a network. You may not find energy from talking to people as I do, right? So one way people say it helps, if you're not naturally extroverted, is to really schedule time for yourself to both think about yourself and also reach out to people who you are interested in for whatever reason, for friendship, for, as I said, the mom network, or for professional reasons, and to just genuinely both make time and find time to talk with people and to put yourself in situations where you might not be comfortable, but to remember that no one really is comfortable in meeting a bunch of strangers and talking to them, even me. But you never know what you might learn about, what you might hear about, and what you might find in keeping time for yourself and time to reach out to people and connect. It is really hard to do right now, I'll say, in the pandemic and in COVID. Things like this APAICS convening and many other Zoom convenings are also helpful. It's just not the same as being in person. So for someone extroverted like me, I'm especially feeling the pain of seeing the same two people every day.
But one of the things that I admire about you is you are generous. And what I find the best networkers respond, and you always respond right away. That's one of your great qualities.
Just show up, isn't it? Somebody said, just 90% of life is just showing up. Like, just show up and be there. Yeah.
Well, you talked about the twists and turns of your careers. I don't know, maybe you want to talk about a twist that didn't go well, and then maybe give some of our rising stars who are watching us, where have you seen people derail and you want to say, just don't go down that path? What advice would you give?
Sure. And I'll just say, any twist where you find yourself in a situation, you're like, this isn't quite the right job for me. I'll just say, find something about it that you can learn. Because every single job I've had, all the way back to when I was waiting tables in college, I have learned something valuable from, I'll say, and sometimes the learning doesn't come until later. When I realize that I'm leaning on a skill I might have learned in an environment you would have never thought you would be learning from. So I just want to keep that front and center. I did, as I mentioned before, when I left the federal government the first time, moved back to Northern California, I actually went into a consulting firm. And it was an economics consulting firm hoping to start a public policy practice, which is why I went. But in consulting firms, you have to bill your time. And so I ended up working on a whole host of other very intellectually interesting projects, but not directionally aligned to my own personal mission, both in terms of the clients and what we were doing. I did sort of learn a lot of things from that job, but it really encouraged me to look a little bit beyond where I was and figure out a way to go back into public service. And it's from there that I went to the city and county of San Francisco for about 10 years. So in a whole bunch of different jobs. So I'll just say, when you're having a twist or a turn, as you call it, Tina, there's always something you can learn in your twist and turn, but there's also a way for you to get more clear on what's motivating you and what you want to do.
Well, you're famous for saying feedback is a gift. And so, you have coached so many wonderful people. Have you seen a pattern of where people derail? And if there's a piece of advice you could give them, like, don't ever do this, no matter what path you're on, Anything like that?
Yeah, it's so hard, Tina, because it's situational. And I'll just say, like, take feedback with a grain of salt. It is always a gift, and you can use the gift or you can return it and trade it in for something else. There's always something to be learned, but sometimes not taking advice is the good thing to do. So I'll just put that out there. So situationally, as I see people who stumble a little or having trouble understanding why things are not working out for them as leaders, I would say the issue is a dissonance between what's happening and what they're doing and the effect of what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's often when people are trying something and they're actually feeling kind of put upon, like, I'm doing everything I can and nobody's appreciating me, but they're not ascertaining other things that could be going on in the situation. And so I would say the extent to which anyone, and this is a teachable, learnable thing, can enhance their emotional intelligence, take those opportunities, because as you go higher and higher up the levels, emotional intelligence is what really separates really great leaders from those that are just very good technically, but not able to move an organization or a team or a staff in another direction.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the signature questions of APAICS, they ask this of everyone, is what does it mean to be a resilient leader? And given what we're going through right now, have you seen changes in what it means to be a resilient leader?
That's such a great question, Tina. Such a great question. I would say what makes a resilient leader is to be curious, and to take a continuous learning approach to any situation that you're in, and also to your career. And when you're curious, you can put on a learning mindset to understand what's happening and to understand how you might be able to make things better. So what I'm seeing a little bit in terms of what we're dealing with both COVID and, you know, organizations like Urban Institute and others, hopefully all organizations, are taking a deep look inside of their own systems post the murder of George Floyd, to understand what role you might be having in supporting and including all people, but in specifically Black people in your organizations. If you're not a Black-led organization, how are you ensuring that you are not creating a system that is contributing to, like, just a whole bunch of institutional and systemic racism that a lot of people of color face, but especially it has been especially brought to light how this is affecting Black people. And so we've been doing a lot of introspection at Urban and also a lot of work. So I think what I'm seeing about resiliency is an additional ability to be very flexible and agile with how you structure your work in the COVID era, but also to be aware, be curious of how things outside in the world are affecting everyday work for people that you work with and you care about.
Well, I interviewed Admiral Allen one day, and he says, you know, sometimes we go to the basement in our emotions. So on a more personal level, what do you do when you're down? How do you spring back up?
Oh, that's such a good question. I do very simple things when I feel down. First of all, I sleep more. It's a small thing, but I'll just say there's nothing that feels better than after a good night of sleep when you're working really hard and feeling like you're not making a difference, which sometimes you can feel like in the work that we do, Tina. So I make sure I sleep a lot, and I make sure that I take a lot of walks with people that I love, because I get a lot of energy from other people, even if they're introverts. So it just helps me. It helps me a lot.
Let me turn to Madeline or others to see or have any other questions come in, because Nani and I could keep talking all day. We just love to get together. So have any questions come in, Madeline, or our producers on the show? Keep talking. Okay. So what are you proudest of having accomplished, Nani, in your career, in your very illustrious career? And then I want to ask you the flip side. What's your biggest disappointment?
Oh God, Tina, I feel like I'm getting interviewed by you.
You are.
Tell us where you want to be in 5 years. Okay.
Everybody wants to know about you. You're such a star.
Okay. There are a couple things I think about when I think about some of my proudest accomplishments. One we already talked about, which is standing up the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. We did that work under duress. And what I mean by that is we had a very short timeline to put together an organization that could actually go and then do things with the authorities that they were given. So that at the same time that we were doing that work, we were also we were having a lot of, you may be familiar with inspector generals. Those are people who do audits and investigations of work in the federal government. So we were actually building the organization while we were getting audited and investigated at the same time. So that's what I mean by under duress. And so I'm grateful for my time there. And it really wasn't that I did all the things, but I got to be a part of creating a new thing, and that I'm very proud of. And I also think a little bit about the work I first did in the federal government when I was working on healthcare. I was a part of a team that put the first laws and budget into place for the Children's Health Insurance Program. And I'll just say one thing that helps people is having a clear line of sight for what they're working on to what the actual outcome is. So we were doing all this work and estimating the budget, and it was part of the Balanced Budget Act of 1997. So that's how long ago it was. And, yay, there's a new Children's Health Insurance Program. This is great. Each state was going to decide how they wanted to implement that program. Well, when I moved to California, I had a really great hairdresser, and she was complaining to me because she was a single mom. She had lost health coverage for 2 of her kids. They were teenagers. They played sports. She needed to have healthcare to let them play the sports. And I said, hey, there's this program. It's the Children's Health Insurance Program. Have you looked into it? She had no idea what it was. This was somebody who was making too much money to be in Medicaid and probably wouldn't have availed herself of Medicaid anyway, because there are stigmas attached with leveraging very good programs. But California had a Children's Health Insurance Program, and she basically covered both her kids. And so it was seeing a clear line of sight from a policy issue I worked on to somebody actually benefiting from it. That was really just gave me a lot of energy and made me feel proud that I was working on it.
Well, we have a question coming in. You worked in 2 different cabinet departments. So the question is, what's different about them? You were at Treasury, you were the CFO and Assistant Secretary, and then you moved over to be Deputy Secretary. What was it like to transition from one cabinet to another?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Each agency has its own culture and directives and set of work that they're doing. And as I think about it, drivers of success, right? So both what are you in the business of doing, what's your mission, but what are really the levers or drivers for success? And so actually having the time at Treasury and spending time in different jobs at Treasury really helped me make a transition to housing and urban development much easier than I think if I had come at the outside. I went to housing and urban development in the last 2+ years of the Obama administration. And so they already had a series of things that they were driving towards and trying to implement. So understanding how the federal government fit together was incredibly transferable to my work at HUD. And if you remember what we were talking about earlier, I do work through people. And so really taking a listening and learning approach at housing and urban development when I first got there was probably the best thing I could have done, because I'm not coming in with the answers. I'm coming in to create the conditions for people to do their very best work. And so having that experience at Treasury really transferred over easily to HUD for me.
Good. Well, we have another question coming in. If you had a chance to come back into government, what's one thing you would do to make government work more effective?
It's such a great question. I take a people first approach to my work. So one thing I would want to do to make government work appropriately is to make sure that the people who are really doing the work every day, the career staff, have the supports and the pathway that they need to do their very best work. And that is what I would want to do, and that is what I would want to leave behind.
Yeah, but we know how hard that is. You've got
It is.
OMB and OPM and GSA.
Yeah, and also you have people who have come through many administrations who are just like, you're just another person. What are you going to do that's different? I'm exaggerating. I mean, I do think that there's always excitement and energy around having new leaders come in and out, but I also think it's very hard, and don't want to underestimate that coming into any organization and certainly any federal agency. It's just, you're really doing your work through people. So you have to understand what is motivating, but also what you can best do to support.
Right. We have another great question coming in, since you worked in federal, state, federal and state and local, and then a nonprofit. So what are the differences between those different organizations or types, you know, local government, federal, and nonprofit? Somebody's asking.
That's such a great question. I think what's interesting is that in any job I've had, I lean on a skill set, but also an approach and framework for understanding how something runs and how to best contribute to make it run better. And so, or accomplish a mission. So while there are definitely differences, mostly in scope and scale, the organizing principles that I use to navigate are the same. And so that may be surprising, but whether I'm in I was in a 20-person department in San Francisco when I first moved into San Francisco that had a big mandate and a small staff. Whether I was doing that or moving all the way to across the country to work in Treasury, which has both a big mandate and a big staff, the approaches are very similar. And so I would just say to remember that they talk a lot about transferable skills when you're in, when you're getting educated, if you're getting a master's degree or some other degree. I would not, I want to stress that that is actually really the key to all things, which is transferable skills and experiences. And so you really have to understand yourself and what you're going to apply, almost like a toolkit, which tools will you apply in which situation. But the main differences are really scope and scale, and also leadership. Even if you're the very tippy top of an agency, you're still collaborating with other leaders as well. And you should be accountable to people who are basically the taxpayers that want some kind of an outcome from you. So those things change with different jobs and in different levels, but the basic skills that I would use are very, very similar.
Yeah, and I've seen you in operation, and your skills are your people skills, your process and system skills, your strong focus on goals and outcomes. You use data to measure. I've seen you apply that in all the different worlds that you've lived in since I've known you for over a decade.
Yeah.
So those are all transferable. And if you have that like mental model, as Nani says, you can actually work in any of these mission-driven organizations. They all share that.
Yeah, but I'll say, Tina, one of the things I know you do well and that I actually had to go into a boot camp for is facilitation. It's an unsung skill that can make or break even just a small meeting. But when I went to San Francisco and I was trying to do community budgeting, if you think about like Parks and Recreation and like a community meeting that Leslie Knope might have tried to run, those are the kind of meetings I got thrown into. And here I had been doing all this analytical work. So putting myself in a 1 week, every day community facilitation training helps me all the time, but it also helped me handle a room of unhappy, or happy, who knows, taxpayers that happen to show up in a school cafeteria in the evening, and you're trying to facilitate, some kind of an outcome out of that. So
well, you clearly mastered it, because I admire your ability. Well, we've come to the end of our show, and I just want to wrap up. Aristotle said quality is not an act, it's a habit. Here you have a quality act who practices quality every day. Everything she's done in her career has been a success. And you've got some great insights from her, I hope, in this 30 minutes. So we look to you, Nani, to continue to lead us in whatever level of government or organization. And I turn it back to Madeline. And thank you very much, everyone, for just a fun conversation with a very dear friend. Back to you, Madeline.
Thank you so much, Tina. Thank you, Nani, for sharing all of your insight. Greatly appreciate your time and being such an inspirational leader. For our audience, we have a special edition of APEX in Conversation next week. We are part of the Women's Collective Summit. On Thursday, July 30th at 12:30, we will have the Honorable Lucy Coe, Judge of the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of California. It's going to be an exciting day of content for us. We're going to be celebrating and uplifting a lot of API women elected leaders and those who are interested in running for office or being a part of public service in some way. So our special guest at 12:30 next week is going to be a part of that conversation. And so even if you're not a woman and you want to be a part of this conversation, we really want you to join in with us. So please RSVP. So thank you so much for joining us this week. Look forward to seeing you the next time. Enjoy the rest of today.
Thank you.
Bye. Great job, Nani.
Thanks, Tina.